I'm Doug McKnight, and I'm going to tie you a Breadcrust wet fly. It's a kind of an old classic pattern. I don't really know who came up with it, but man, it is really good. You know, classic soft tackle. It's great to fish down on the cross or float it to a rising fish that's eating emergers. It's a really, really good caddis pupa imitation, as well as a mayfly. So we'll get started. First, go over the materials with you. The first thing we're going to pick out is a just standard wet fly hook. A little bit of hare's ear dubbing, some Hungarian partridge neck feathers, and last but not least, a rough grouse tail feather. All right, the first thing we're going to do before we even get a hook in there is we're going to take our grouse feather and pluck it from the hide. And what we're going to do is take a long bladed pair of scissors and just give this stem a bit of a haircut. I'm going to cut all but just maybe, an 1/8 of an inch of the feather off of the stem on both sides. Okay, now that we've got that done, what I like to do is put the tip of the feather right into the vise, just so it's stuck on there pretty good. And we're going to take a single edge razor blade. I usually don't use double edge ones. They tend to be a little bit too sharp and too thin. This single edge one works rather well for this. And what we're going to do is actually take this razor blade and slice this stem right in half. And kind of the tricky part is getting it started. And once you get it started, you can usually just very gently just go along, do a little bit at a time. And just go all the way down until you can't go any further. And the reason we do this is that this stem is pretty thick, and if you split it in half, it won't end up being too bulky. And you're going to, just like I did there, you're going to probably waste a few of these guys and not cut them right. So I've got another one here that's cut perfectly. All right, so now I'm going to put my hook in the vise and actually get started tying this guy. And for hook sizes on these, I usually tie them anywhere from about a size 10 up to maybe a 16. Once you get down to a 16, this becomes a pretty difficult fly to tie, unless you modify it a little bit. And the first thing I do is just start the thread up by the eye of the hook and just wind all the way back to the barb. Stop right about there. Cut the little tag end to thread off. Now, the first thing I'm going to tie in is this stem right here, and I'm just going to take my thumbnail, and just strip out kind of the core of that stem and just kind of flatten it down. And that'll make it a lot easier to tie in. And I'm just going to tie that in just above the barb with a couple of good tight wraps, just like that. Next thing, I take some hare's ear dubbing and just build a little underbody. And what you want to shoot for when you wrap this dubbing is just a nice tapered shape, almost a cigar shape. You don't want to go too fat. This guy, when you wrap it, is going to add quite a bit of width to the body, and you don't want to block the shank of the hook. So just wind that dubbing forward up to maybe just a little shy of the eye of the hook, just like that. Then we're going to take that grouse quill and You don't want to pull on this guy too much. Just pretty gently, at least at first. Just wind it one wrap right in front of the other. You can leave a little bit of space in between each wrap. And you'll notice as I'm wrapping that, those little feather fibers are sticking out, making a really neat, unique looking body. The fish absolutely love this thing. Anytime their caddis hatching, this is one of the flies that I go to. And I usually fish it on pretty heavy tippet, because when you cast these guys down and across and the fish hit it, they usually hit it pretty hard, and you'll probably get broken off a couple times until you figure out how to fish something heavier. And just tie that off and trim up any little excess that's hanging out there. You're going to have kind of a little bit of a lumpy head. This grouse quill is pretty thick and it takes quite a bit to get it finally tied down. Next thing I'm going to do is grab a nice mottled Hungarian partridge neck feather and just pull one of these guys out. And you want the fibers to be about as long as the body, maybe a little bit more. So it's always good to give them a measure. You don't want one that's way too big or way too small. Now what I'm going to do is strip off all this fuzz right here. So I'm left with just the fibered portion, not the marabou stuff. And then the next thing I'm going to do is very gently pull most of those fibers back. You hold it by the tip of the feather and just very gently stroke those guys back so they lean back. And then the very last thing I'm going to do is trim the tip off, so you maybe have a little 1/8 of an inch, and that's your tie-in point. That's where you're going to tie in this feather. So you want to tie it in tip first. Tends to lay back when you wrap the hackle, tends to lay back a little bit nicer. Tied that guy in, and really all you want to do is maybe a wrap and a half, maybe 2 wraps at the most of this. You don't need a ton of this hackle on there. Some guys even just do 1 wrap. I usually do about a wrap and a half. And if hackle pliers make it easy for you to grab a hold of that hackle, feel free to use them. And once I get that about wrap and a half of hackle on there, I'm just going to go ahead and tie that off. And then trim off any little fiber that's sticking out as well as the stem. And then pretty much go right from there to whip finishing. And you coat this guy with a little bit of head cement, you're done.